They say the holidays bring people together, but for me, Christmas was the day my family made it crystal clear. I was no longer one of them. The snow hadn't even stopped falling when it happened. 1 minute, the house was filled with the comforting chaos of dinner, silverware clinking, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes, and the syrupy scent of cranberry sauce hanging in the air. And then, without warning, it shattered. There was no grand explosion, no screaming, just a heavy pause, a few tense glances exchanged across the table, and a single cold command from my older sister. You need to leave. No discussion, no explanation. No one stood up for me. Not my father, who always claimed I was his favorite. Not my mother, who had once sworn nothing could come between us. Not even my younger brother, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought it was a bad joke at first, some cruel little stunt that would be followed by laughter and an awkward toast. But no one laughed. Instead, my niece silently retrieved my coat and set it gently by the door, as if she'd rehearsed it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't spontaneous. This had been decided long before the ham hit the oven. They let me gather my things in silence. No one offered to help. No one said goodbye. My boots thudded against the floor with a finality I couldn't shake, and when the door clicked shut behind me, it felt more like a vault sealing off everything I thought I knew. Outside, the world was blanketed in white, soft and indifferent. My suitcase, a flimsy thing I hadn't used in years, dragged behind me, wheels sticking in the snow as I stepped off the porch and into a life I hadn't prepared for. There were Christmas lights still blinking across the lawn, mocking me with their cheer. The whole neighborhood was lit up like a Hallmark movie, while I stood alone in the dark, watching my breath cloud in front of me, the cold biting harder than any insult hurled across that table. What hurt most wasn't the exile. It wasn't even the timing. It was the ease. The way they moved on without me, as if I'd never been there at all. As if years of late-night phone calls, emergency babysitting, and silent sacrifices meant nothing. I had held that family together like glue for years. And now, they had peeled me off like a sticker they no longer needed. But this isn't a story about heartbreak. Not really. It's not even a story about betrayal. Not in the way most people think. Because standing there in the snow, I didn't fall apart. Not completely. Something else happened. Something quieter, but far more dangerous. I decided this was the last time I'd be the one standing outside looking in. This wasn't the end. It was the warning shot. The thing about family is that you don't always notice when the cracks start appearing. You don't see the slow erosion of trust, the subtle shift from love to obligation, or the way the laughter fades until you're left with nothing but the memory of it. For me, the change had been gradual, imperceptible at first, like a shadow stretching just a little further each day until it swallowed the light. Growing up, I had always been the glue, the peacekeeper, the one who stepped in when the fights broke out, who ran interference when the blame was thrown around. My mother, sweet but weak, would retreat into the kitchen during the arguments, eyes cast downward as though pretending she couldn't hear her own children tearing each other apart. My father, a quiet man with the temperament of a storm cloud, would sink deeper into his recliner, making no effort to intervene unless his own pride was at risk. But me? I was the one who held it all together. I would soothe my younger brother when he cried, take the brunt of my sister's sarcastic jabs, and even clean up after everyone else when dinner was ruined by someone's temper or someone's forgetfulness. But the more I gave, the less they seemed to notice. I had always believed in the idea of family, blood being thicker than water, the unspoken promise that no matter what happened, they would always be there for each other. But as I got older, I began to realize something uncomfortable. While I believed in the family didn't always believe in me. It had started small. When I moved out after high school to attend a local college, it wasn't a big deal to me. But when my older sister, Claire, had her first baby and didn't even mention me in the pregnancy announcement, something clicked inside me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just one of those things. She was busy, they were busy, and maybe it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Claire didn't need me. She didn't need my help planning the baby shower, or giving her advice on how to balance career and motherhood. And I, desperate to prove I still had a place, poured myself into my job, working long hours to make up for the loneliness, to fill the gaps that had started to open in my life. But when I called my mother one night just needing someone to talk to. All I got was a distracted, "I'm making dinner, sweetie. Maybe another time." I could feel it, the distance between us growing, inch by inch, like the space between train cars that were supposed to be connected. By the time my father's health began to decline, I was the only one still showing up. My siblings, Claire especially, were too caught up in their own lives to care for our aging father, and my mother? Well, she had always been emotionally absent. I found myself making his doctor's appointments, taking him to physical therapy, sitting with him during long stretches of silence that stretched far beyond the walls of our house. It was during one of those long visits that my father, a man of few words, finally said something I hadn't expected. "You know, Lizzie," he'd said, his voice thick with the remnants of a life spent in quiet frustration, "sometimes I think you're the only one who's ever really tried to keep us all together." I had been taken aback by his words, surprised by the sudden affection. But it was fleeting, just like everything else in our family. It didn't stop Claire from making yet another snide remark the following week, calling me Daddy's little girl, when I had taken a day off work to stay with him. It didn't stop my mother from frowning when she saw me trying to help with dinner after a long day of running errands for my father. And it didn't stop the resentment from building. The cracks deepened over the years, and my sacrifices became more than just unpaid bills and missed opportunities. They became an unspoken debt that my family never acknowledged. They grew comfortable in their routine, comfortable with me doing everything. And when I started to speak up, to ask for something in return, their faces would freeze over like I'd spoken a language they didn't understand. One Thanksgiving, after the family had gathered around the table for a meal that should have been filled with gratitude, I had casually mentioned how tired I was. "I haven't had a weekend off in months," I said. "It's been nonstop with Dad and work." My mother had cut me off with a sharp, "Well, you don't have to do everything, you know. We're all capable adults." It should have been a passing remark, but it stung like a slap. It wasn't that I thought I was the only one who could handle things. It was the tone, the dismissal, the belief that I was being too much, as if my constant sacrifice had become an inconvenience. And yet, every time I pulled away, even for a moment, it was me who was blamed. When I couldn't make it to one of Claire's many events or missed a phone call because I was simply too exhausted, I was the one who got the guilt trip. "Must be nice to be so busy," Claire would sneer, her words dripping with venom. "We all have lives too, you know." But they didn't, not really. Because when my life stopped revolving around the family's needs, I started to see just how much of my own self had been sacrificed in the process. By the time Christmas rolled around that year, the resentment between me and my family had thickened into something unspoken but undeniable. I had kept my head down for so long, pretending everything was fine, and maybe for a while I believed it myself. But in the end, there was only so much a person could take. And that Christmas, I finally realized the truth I'd been avoiding all these years. No one was ever going to notice how much I did until I stopped doing it. No one would understand my worth until I stopped giving it away, so freely. But they weren't prepared for what would happen next. I was done being the one who was always left behind. Done being the one who fixed everything, only to be blamed when it broke. And when Christmas Day came, I wouldn't just walk out of their lives. I would walk into mine. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday. There was something about the way the house transformed, how the worn-out furniture looked new again when covered in garlands, how the lights twinkled like they could somehow banish all the unspoken words hanging in the air. For a few fleeting hours, it felt like a world where everything could be perfect again. The laughter would be genuine, the food would be enough, and the family, my family, would remember why they were all supposed to be together in the first place. But this Christmas was different. I knew it the moment I stepped into the living room. The house was decorated, yes, but there was no warmth. There was no cheer. The air was thick with something sharper than the crisp winter outside. The quiet had already settled in, just like the uneaten dinner that sat, waiting, too pristine for anyone to touch. My eyes quickly scanned the room, my father in his chair as quiet as ever, my mother, already lost in the comfort of her wine glass, pretending like everything was fine, Claire, sitting on the couch, her eyes flickering toward me, but only for a second before she turned away. And Matt, my younger brother, who was sitting at the table with his phone out, not bothering to even glance up. It didn't take long to notice the little shifts. The absence of conversation. The awkward silences that none of us wanted to address. I had hoped, even if only for a moment, that the day would be different. That perhaps, just perhaps, this was going to be the one where we all came together and mended the cracks that had formed over the years. But as soon as the turkey was served, I could feel it, tension coiling around us like a storm on the horizon. It was only a matter of time before it broke. And break it did. The first spark came when I asked, almost hesitantly, if we could just try to make the evening feel normal. Can we just talk? I said, my voice softer than I intended. How's work, Claire? You guys have any big plans for New Year's? My words were meant to bridge the chasm, to pull everyone into the light for just a little while. But Claire's response was colder than the icy air outside. I'm not in the mood for small talk, Claire shot back, barely meeting my eyes. Some of us have actual lives, Elizabeth. There it was, the familiar sting of dismissal, the kind that made my chest tighten, but I had grown used to it. What I hadn't expected was the subtle shift in the room as my mother, glass of wine in hand, looked away. My heart skipped. My mother, always the one to smooth things over, always the one who encouraged family unity, she wasn't even looking in my direction. The quiet undercurrent of disapproval was unmistakable. Still, I pressed on. I hadn't come this far just to be ignored. I've been busy too, Claire, I said, my voice steady. Taking care of Dad, work. Hell, I haven't had a day off in weeks. But I still wanted to be here with you all. Can we just get through this without all the weirdness? It was in that moment that my father shifted in his chair, his eyes glassy, and his voice cutting through the silence. Maybe you should have stayed home. We don't need your martyr act here tonight. The words hit me like a slap in the face, and for the briefest of seconds, everything went still. I blinked, looking at him, looking at my mother, who suddenly seemed so small in her seat, avoiding my gaze. I could feel my face flushing, an odd mix of humiliation and anger. His voice had been low, almost muffled by the years of neglect between us, but the meaning was clear. It wasn't the first time he'd made me feel like I was a burden. Over the years, his passive-aggressive remarks had layered themselves on top of my sense of duty until I had convinced myself that it was okay, that I could carry the weight of their expectations. But that night, something in me snapped. No, you don't get to do that, I said, my voice rising despite myself. I'm here because I want to be here. I've been the one holding this family together while all of you just sat back and watched. And this is what I get. I'm tired of trying to keep us all in one piece when no one else even cares. No one even notices. For a split second, the room was frozen. No one moved. Claire's face twisted into a sneer, the faintest hint of contempt coloring her features. Matt, still glued to his phone, made an effort to act oblivious, his fingers moving quickly, as if it might all just disappear if he didn't engage. But it was my mother that hurt the most. I looked at her, eyes searching for something, anything, but her gaze remained distant, a mask of detachment that I had seen too many times before. No one was on my side. And then it happened. Claire stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her face was flushed, her anger bubbling over. You think you've got it so hard? You think you're the only one who's sacrificed for this family? Well, newsflash, Lizzie, we all have. You're not some fucking saint. Before I could respond, Claire's voice cut through, raw and cutting. I'm done with you. Done with the guilt trips. Done with the hero complex. You're exhausting. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's time for you to go. It wasn't the words that crushed me. It was the finality in Claire's tone, the way it felt like the last nail in the coffin. My sister had always been sharp, always been dismissive. But this time there was something deeper in her words, something that I had never expected to hear from someone I had once called my best friend. There it was, the breaking point. Fine, I whispered, but the word felt like lead in my mouth. I'll go. And just like that, it was done. The family who had once shared everything now stood divided by a rift so deep it couldn't be bridged. The dinner that should have been filled with joy was nothing more than a hollow shell. I stood, the taste of betrayal heavy on my tongue, and without another word, grabbed my coat, slung it over my shoulder, and walked toward the door. As I opened it, the cold air rushing in, I could hear my mother's faint, desperate voice calling after me, but I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I had already made my decision. And this time I wasn't coming back. The streets outside are silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath my boots. I walk, feeling like I'm moving through a fog, the kind that blurs everything but the sound of my own thoughts. My head spins with the echoes of my family's words, still ringing in my ears. The sting of Claire's parting shot, my father's dismissive tone, the absence of my mother's support. They're all pieces of a puzzle I've been too blind to see coming together for years. But now it's done. The doors close behind me, and I'm out here in the cold, both literally and metaphorically, with nothing but a suitcase and the fragments of a family I no longer recognize. For a while, I wander aimlessly. My feet take me to the park, then to a cafe, and then back to a bench in the middle of the city, where I sit, numb, staring at nothing in particular. My phone died hours ago. No missed calls. No messages. The isolation is suffocating. I try not to think about the fact that no one is looking for me. But the tears don't come. I'm too tired to cry. I've spent so many years crying for the approval of people who never truly saw me, and it's never done me any good. Instead, I feel empty. Like I've just spent the last decade of my life on autopilot, running in circles, trying to make everyone else happy. And now that it's over, there's nothing left of the woman I once was. The next few days pass in a blur. I find myself couch surfing between friends who have their own lives to live, but they open their doors to me anyway. There are no grand conversations, no heart-to-hearts. Just the quiet hum of lives still unfolding, still unpredictable, just like mine. I wake up, look at the ceiling for a few minutes, and then drag myself to the kitchen, not knowing what the day will hold, but certain it couldn't be worse than the night before. At first, I tell myself I'm fine, that this is just a temporary setback. After all, I've gotten through hard times before. But deep down, I know this isn't just another setback. I've been dismissed by the very people I've tried to hold together for so long, and for the first time in my life, I feel like the only person who truly understands my struggle is me. And that's when it hits me. I don't need their approval. I don't need them to validate my worth. I've spent my entire life trying to fit into a role that was never meant for me, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who held everyone else up while silently crumbling inside. I've bent and twisted myself into whatever shape the family needed me to be, and in doing so, I lost sight of who I was. The constant giving has worn me down to the point where I no longer recognize the person in the mirror. But now, in the silence of my loneliness, something deep inside me stirs. It's not a dramatic, life-altering realization. It's quieter than that. It's the moment when I realize I have choices again. Choices that don't revolve around my family. I don't need to be their constant support if they won't even offer me the same in return. I don't need to stay in that toxic cycle any longer. I am stronger than the passive-aggressive jabs, stronger than the guilt trips, stronger than the long years of trying to earn love that was never truly given. One evening, as I sit alone in a coffee shop, my mind flickering between the memories of the past and the possibilities of the future, I look up and catch my own reflection in the window. For the first time in years, I see a woman who isn't defined by the people who walked out on her. I see someone who's been through hell and still stands. And in that moment, I make a decision. I'm not going to be a martyr anymore. I'm not going to be the person who lets others use me, walk all over me, and then act like nothing's happened. I'm not going to sit in the shadows and wait for them to change. I'm going to start changing for myself. The next morning, I go to the gym. Not because I need to lose weight or look a certain way, but because I need to feel something different, something I haven't felt in a long time. The burn in my muscles, the exhaustion that comes with pushing myself harder than I ever have before. It's a reminder that I'm alive, that I still have the strength to fight for myself. By the end of the week, I've set a plan in motion. I find a new apartment in a quieter part of the city, one with space to breathe and no ghosts of old memories. It's not much, just a small one-bedroom unit, but it's mine. There are no judgments, no expectations. Just a place where I can start over. And I do start over. Slowly but surely, I reclaim my life piece by piece. I reach out to old friends I lost touch with, the ones who never judged me, the ones who remembered me for who I truly was, not for what I did for others. I find myself laughing again, not the nervous, forced laughter that used to be my shield, but real, genuine laughter that feels like freedom. My job, once just something to fill the void, becomes a new opportunity for growth. I throw myself into it, not out of necessity, but out of desire to build something for myself. I find a new sense of purpose, one that has nothing to do with my family and everything to do with the woman I'm becoming. Weeks turn into months, and little by little, the weight of the past begins to lift. I still have moments of doubt, of course. The temptation to fall back into old habits, caring too much about what others think, trying to win approval that will never come, is always there. But I don't let it control me. I'm learning how to set boundaries, how to say no without guilt, how to put myself first without feeling selfish. It's not a perfect transformation. In fact, there are days when the old wounds feel raw and exposed. But the difference now is that I can face them. I don't have to hide anymore. I'm my own person, independent and strong, and for the first time in a long time, I'm proud of who I'm becoming. There will always be a part of me that mourns the loss of my family, the idea of what could have been. But I'm not looking back anymore. I've finally learned how to take care of myself, to love myself, to rise above the pain and find a future that's mine to create. And it feels damn good. The air was different when I returned home, but it wasn't the kind of difference I had expected. It wasn't a peaceful calm, a sense of quiet reflection where time had healed all wounds. No, this air was thick with expectation, with curiosity, and most of all, with the weight of unresolved conflict. It had been months since I had walked out of that house on Christmas night, and every day in between had been a step toward figuring out who I was without my family's approval. But now, standing at the front door of my childhood home, my hand hovering over the doorknob, I wasn't entirely sure what I hoped to find on the other side. Closure, redemption, or simply a place to find myself once more. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I was expecting anymore. After everything, the hurt, the abandonment, the years of being both the glue and the scapegoat, I knew I couldn't walk back into this house and pretend like nothing had happened. I had spent so much time trying to live up to their expectations, trying to be the one to hold the family together, that I had forgotten to ask myself if I even wanted to stay in a family that would treat me so carelessly. But here I was, standing in front of it, because despite everything, the pull of family still had a hold on me. I had come to terms with the fact that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the hurt, the betrayals, or the quiet dismissals that had left scars on my heart. But I could change how I moved forward, and that was why I was here. I took a deep breath and turned the knob, stepping inside. The familiar smell of pine and cinnamon greeted me as I crossed the threshold. It should have felt comforting, but all it did was remind me of everything I had walked away from. The living room was decorated as it always had been, ornate and bright, the same framed family photos on the walls, the same crack in the windowsill from when my brother had thrown a ball too hard. Time had moved forward, but in this house, it felt as though it had stood still. I could hear my mother in the kitchen, humming as she stirred something on the stove. When I entered, the soft clatter of the spoon against the pot faltered. She turned slowly, her eyes widening as if unsure if she was seeing a ghost, or if this was some sort of dream she had convinced herself she was living. "Lizzie," she asked, her voice shaky but laced with the same familiar warmth I had craved for years. I nodded, but no words came. I wasn't sure what to say. I hadn't come here for a grand reunion. I had come here to speak my truth, to see if there was a chance, however small, that my family might see me for who I was now, not the person they had expected me to be. I didn't know if you'd ever want to come back," she said, wringing her hands in the way she always did when she was nervous. I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly suppressed it. It wasn't my fault. I had given so much of myself to these people, and in the end, they hadn't even seen me. The irony was that, in leaving, I had finally found myself. I wasn't going to lose that again, not for anyone. I wasn't sure if I could come back, either, I admitted, my voice tight with emotion. But I've spent so much time trying to figure out who I am without you all. I guess I just wanted to see if we could figure out a way to be real with each other. My mother's face softened, but there was a hint of sorrow there, too. "I'm sorry, Lizzie," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for you to feel like this. I always thought you could handle everything. I thought you didn't need me." I shook my head, my chest aching at the apology. "I didn't need you to be perfect, Mom. I just needed you to see me. I needed you to notice how much I was carrying, how much I was giving. and I needed you to see that I was drowning under the weight of it all. But you never did. None of you did. My mother took a step forward, her eyes glistening with tears. I see it now, she said softly. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. My heart clenched. The woman standing before me wasn't the person I had wanted her to be all these years. She wasn't the rock, the protector, the one who would always have my back. But for the first time, I could see her as she was, human, flawed, imperfect, but still willing to try. There was something about this moment that made me realize the depth of what I had been searching for all along. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't about fixing the past or expecting everyone to be who I wanted them to be. It was about acceptance, about understanding that sometimes people mess up. Sometimes they don't know how to love you the way you need to be loved. But that didn't mean they didn't want to try. My thoughts were interrupted when the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Claire appeared in the doorway, her eyes immediately locking onto mine. There was a long silence between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of the hurt we had both endured. I wasn't sure how Claire would react, whether she would be defensive, angry, or indifferent. But to my surprise, Claire stepped forward, hesitated for a moment, and then wrapped her arms around me. I'm sorry, Claire murmured, her voice thick with emotion. I've been such a jerk. I was jealous of you, Lizzie, always feeling like you had everything together. I didn't realize how much you were hurting, how much you were carrying. I'm sorry. My breath caught in my throat, my chest tightening as the weight of Claire's apology settled over me. I had never expected to hear those words from my sister. In my mind, Claire had always been the one who couldn't be reached, the one who could never understand. But here, now, in this raw and unexpected moment, I saw something different. We were both broken. Both of us. But maybe that was the first step toward rebuilding, toward finding some semblance of what family could be, if we all learned to see each other as human beings, not just roles we expected each other to play. The doorbell rang, and Matt appeared in the hallway, his eyes flicking nervously between the three women in the room. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his usual defiance replaced with something more vulnerable. I guess I'm supposed to apologize too, huh? He said, a half smile playing on his lips, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I met his gaze and nodded. Yeah, you probably should. But it's okay. We're here now. We all stood there, awkwardly, yet undeniably connected by something new. The air in the room felt different now, not lighter exactly, but more honest. It wasn't going to be easy, and there was no guarantee that everything would magically go back to the way it was. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was room for growth, for change, for something better. And maybe that was enough. Healing didn't happen overnight. I knew that much. It was one thing to stand in front of my family, in that living room where so many painful memories had settled into the walls, and say I was ready to try again. But it was something entirely different to actually rebuild those relationships that had been shattered for so long, and repair the emotional wounds that had festered underneath the surface. The past didn't just vanish because I said it would. Some days, it felt like every step forward was met with 2 steps back. But still I was determined. This time it was different. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to anyone. I wasn't trying to gain validation or seek approval by doing what I had always done. Endless acts of service, trying to prove my worth through self-sacrifice. No, this time, I was building something I had never let myself build before: boundaries. Those boundaries weren't walls. They were the foundation for something new, a family dynamic that didn't revolve around me giving up pieces of myself just to keep everyone else happy. It started small. At first, there were awkward dinners. The family would gather, and the conversation felt stiff, like we were all walking on eggshells, afraid of saying the wrong thing. But I kept showing up. I sat at the table with my shoulders straighter than they used to be. When my mom would comment on how good I was for helping them all come together, I didn't shrink back. When Claire offered that hollow apology, or Matt asked if I had gotten another one of those promotions at work, as if my career was just another part of my role to play, I didn't let it knock me off balance. I didn't feel the need to apologize for my success or diminish my achievements just to make them more comfortable. Instead, I would smile, acknowledge the comment, and move the conversation forward. Little by little, I was taking control of the narrative, instead of letting the same old dynamics play out. As the weeks went on, I started noticing subtle changes, not just in how my family interacted with me, but in how I was interacting with them. The hurt began to soften, though it never fully disappeared. The guilt that used to suffocate me was replaced with a healthier, more grounded understanding of my role. I wasn't the savior of this family anymore. I wasn't the glue that held everything together. I was simply me, a woman who had a right to live her own life without constantly carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. One evening, after a quiet dinner where the conversation flowed a little easier than usual, Claire and I ended up sitting on the back porch. The cold had settled in, but we both sat in silence, wrapped in thick sweaters and blankets, watching the faint glow of the streetlights reflecting off the snow. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Claire said, her voice softer than it used to be. "About how you always felt like you had to carry everything on your shoulders. I never really understood that before." I glanced over at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Yeah, I get it now," she said, her voice trembling a little. "I always thought you had it all together. You were the strong one, the one who was always in control. But I didn't realize how much you were holding back, how much you were pretending to be okay when you weren't. I'm sorry for not seeing that, for making you feel like you had to be perfect." My heart softened. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was something real. The tension that used to define our relationship started to loosen, but there was still an unease in the air. We weren't healed, not yet, but this was a start. "I think I've been pretending to be okay for a long time," I admitted quietly. "It's easier to be the one who holds it all together, you know? It feels like it gives you a sense of purpose. Like maybe if I can stop everything from falling apart, I'll be worth something. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I just want to be me." "I get that," Claire said, looking at me with a mix of thoughtfulness and understanding. "And I think I need to figure out who I am, too. I've spent so much time hiding behind my anger. It's easier to be angry than to be vulnerable." I nodded, my heart heavy with recognition. "Yeah, I know exactly what you mean." It wasn't some grand breakthrough, but it was real. For the first time, I didn't feel like the one who had to fix everything. For the first time, my family was meeting me halfway. Over the next few months, those small moments of connection kept adding up. My mom, who had always been emotionally distant, started to open up about her own regrets, her own fears. She admitted that she had neglected my needs in the past, and instead of defensive remarks, there were awkward but heartfelt conversations where we acknowledged the past, not glossing over it but facing it. Painful, yes, but essential if we were going to move forward. I didn't have to be the emotional caretaker anymore. Mom, Claire, and Matt all began to shoulder their own burdens. And though it wasn't perfect, it felt like we were all starting to really see each other for the first time. I didn't have to play the role of the fixer anymore. I could just be me. But as my family was changing, so was I. I started to embrace the parts of myself I'd neglected in favor of everyone else's needs. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned years ago, painting, reading books that inspired me, taking long walks to clear my mind. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. And with that space, my confidence grew. I made new friends, deepened the relationships with the ones who had supported me throughout this journey, and even started dating again. Something I had pushed aside for so long because I was too consumed with my family's expectations. There were still challenges ahead, of course. Healing wasn't linear. There were days when old patterns resurfaced, or when I found myself questioning my worth, wondering if I deserved the love and attention I had neglected to give myself. But I learned to be kind to myself on those days, reminding myself that growth didn't mean perfection, it meant progress. And in the middle of that progress, I found something I never thought was possible: peace. Not because everything was perfect, or because all the wounds had healed, but because I had learned to let go of the idea that I had to be everything for everyone. I had finally learned that I deserved the same love and care I'd always given so freely to others. I didn't need to fix my family. I needed to fix myself. And in doing so, I had rebuilt the only family that truly mattered, the one I had found within myself.